how scientists are mapping annoyance levels from wind turbine noise. We got a fascinating report from the Irish Research Council called WindSense, generating wind turbine noise annoyance maps for Ireland.
Great report.
So that's what we'll be focusing on today. Just imagine a map that can actually show you where people are most likely to be bothered by wind farm noise.
That's the goal with this.
Yeah, definitely sounds useful as Ireland really pushes for that goal of carbon neutrality by 2050.
That's right. Ireland is aiming to be carbon neutral by 2050, and a huge part of that plan is wind energy. But of course, wind farms can sometimes be a bit controversial, and noise from the turbines is one of the biggest concerns people have.
For sure.
So this research is really trying to address those concerns using hard data to figure out what's going on.
So it's not just people complaining or sharing anecdotes. They're really digging into the science of sound here.
Exactly. They're going beyond those simple decibel readings.
Ah, I see.
The report really emphasizes psychoacoustics.
Psychoacoustics.
It's all about how humans perceive sound, not just how loud it is in a purely physical sense.
Ah, okay.
And to make it even more real world, they used actual sounds from wind farms in Wexford, Ireland.
Oh, wow. So specific locations.
Yeah, places like Knocknalore, Gibbet Hill, all these real wind farms.
That's pretty cool. So it's not just some generic wind turbine sound from a lab.
Nope, this is the real deal. So you could have two sounds with the same decibel level, but one could be way more annoying because of its frequency or the way it changes over time.
So like I'm thinking a high-pitched whine would be more annoying than a low rumble, even if they were both technically the same volume.
It's about understanding the specific qualities of the sound that make it bothersome. Makes sense if you think about it.
Yeah, because a whisper in a quiet library can be way more annoying than a truck driving by in a busy street, right?
Exactly. It's not just the volume, it's the context and how our brains make sense of it.
It's like fingernails on a chalkboard.
Ooh, don't even get me started on that. But that's a great example, right? They might not be loud, but certain sounds just drive us crazy.
Yeah, totally.
And this study, they dug into 4 key psychoacoustic elements. Loudness, of course, but also sharpness, fluctuation strength, and roughness.
Fluctuation strength, what's that?
It's like that whoomp-thing sound that you sometimes get.
Oh, right, right.
So they took these sounds from the Irish wind farms representing all these different elements, and they played them for people participating in the study. But here's the twist. They had people do a visual memory task while they were listening.
Wait, a visual memory task. What does that have to do with wind turbine noise?
It's really clever, actually.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So they had 46 people in this controlled lab setting a sound chamber at the University of Galway.
Fancy.
And for the task, they used something called a visuospatial working memory task. And people had to compare sets of colored squares.
Oh, okay.
The difficulty would change depending on how many squares there were. It's a way to measure how well we hold visual and spatial information in our minds. They'd change things about the sounds, like the loudness, the sharpness, and even how much they fluctuated. They wanted to see if those specific things affected people's memory performance.
So they were trying to see if those whooshing, thumping sounds would actually mess with your thinking while you're trying to focus.
Exactly. And to get a really complete picture, they also gave people questionnaires.
Ah, I see, like surveys.
Yeah, to measure their general noise sensitivity, like how easily they're bothered by sounds in general, and also their overall attitude towards wind turbines.
Okay, so they're factoring in personal preferences and how people generally feel about wind farms.
Exactly, it's all connected.
Well, I can't wait to hear what they found. Did those wind turbine sounds actually disrupt people's brains?
Surprisingly, no, and that's one of the most important takeaways from this report.
Really? So all that worry that wind farms might make it harder to concentrate, this study says, no.
At least in the short term, yeah. And there's actually very little research on the cognitive effects of wind turbine noise, so this is a big step.
Yeah.
Of course, more research is needed to look at long-term effects, but these initial findings are really valuable.
It's reassuring to hear that those sounds don't seem to hijack our brains while we're trying to think. But I gotta ask, what about the annoyance factor? Did people even notice the sounds, or were they just too busy with those colored squares?
Oh, they definitely noticed the sounds. But get this, while the sounds weren't rated as super annoying overall, some were more bothersome than others.
Okay, now this is getting interesting. So what made some sounds more annoying than others? Was it just how loud they were?
Well, loudness definitely played a big role, or should I say loudness, as they measured it in this study.
How did they measure it?
They used something called the SONE, which is a unit of loudness.
Okay.
SONEs give us a better, more accurate picture of how loud something sounds to us. And it turned out to be the strongest predictor of annoyance, especially for people who said they're generally sensitive to noise.
Makes sense. So those folks who are already easily bothered by sounds were even more likely to be annoyed by certain wind turbine noises.
Exactly. And here's where those psychoacoustics come back in again. The zone, it takes into account both the frequency and the level of a sound, giving us a much more nuanced understanding of how loud something actually feels to us compared to just looking at decibels.
So it's not just how loud the sound is objectively, but how loud our ears and brains actually perceive it to be.
Exactly. And the really cool part is they were able to create mathematical equations based on these findings to predict annoyance levels for different wind turbine sounds.
So they can actually predict how annoying a wind turbine sound will be based on its properties, like its loudness, sharpness, and all that.
That's right. And that prediction leads us to the most groundbreaking part of this study, annoyance maps.
Annoyance maps. Okay, that sounds straight out of a sci-fi movie. Tell me more.
So they took those mathematical equations and combined them with what's called noise propagation models.
Noise what?
Noise propagation models. It's basically software that can predict how sound will travel through the environment, taking into account things like the terrain, the weather, all sorts of
Oh,
factors.
wow, that's impressive. So they're not just looking at the sound itself, but how it would actually spread around a real wind farm, like those ones in Wexford.
Exactly. And they use a special program to bring it all to life visually.
So these maps can show how annoyance levels would likely radiate outward from those wind farms, taking into account all those things like loudness, sharpness, and all those psychoacoustic elements we talked about.
You got it. It's a powerful tool for understanding the potential impact on the people living nearby.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It's incredible what they can do with this kind of research.
I can already see how these annoyance maps could be super useful, especially with Ireland pushing for more wind energy.
Absolutely. Stay tuned because we're going to dig into all that in the next part.
That's right. We'll be back to talk about how these maps could actually be used and what challenges they might face.
We'll look at how these findings about psychoacoustics, memory, and annoyance maps can actually be applied in real life. Whether you're thinking of buying a house near a wind farm, or you're involved in decisions about wind energy in your community, or even if you're just curious about how sound affects us, the WindSense report has a lot to offer. Welcome back to the show. Wind energy is so important, for a sustainable future, but we got to be real. We need to think about the people who actually live near wind farms and how it affects them and annoyance. As the European Environment Agency says, it's not just about how loud something is, it's a whole stress reaction.
Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? It's like when someone's chewing super loud right next to you.
Yeah.
It's not always about how many decibels it is, it's just that it drives you bonkers. So we're going beyond just measuring the sound and looking at how wind turbine noise really affects people like in their everyday lives. And the WindSense report is full of amazing research, so I'm excited to dig into it. I bet for some people, the idea that wind turbine noise could be affecting their thinking is pretty scary. Could it actually lead to serious psychological problems?
That's a really important point. And while we definitely need more research, the fact that this study didn't find any link between wind turbine noise and memory problems is good news.
That's good news, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of anxiety around wind turbines and health, so any evidence to say that there isn't a problem is reassuring to people.
Yeah, it is reassuring, but it's really important to be precise about what this study tells us because it was looking at a particular type of memory task, and it was short term. So, what we need is more research to look at longer term effects.
So we've ruled out one suspect, but we're not done with the investigation. What other cognitive processes should researchers be looking at? And what makes studying this so challenging?
Yeah, so memory is just one part of cognition. There are lots of other mental processes, like attention, making decisions, solving problems, even creativity and controlling our emotions.
So how do you even design studies that can accurately measure the impact of wind turbine noise on all those things? It seems really difficult.
It definitely is challenging. We need to figure out tasks that are sensitive enough to detect even small changes in how people think and perform. And we also need to account for individual differences, like some people are just more sensitive to noise than others. And stress levels can affect how we respond too.
Right. And we can't just have people in a lab for an hour and then think we know everything. We need to know about the long-term effects of living with this noise all the time.
Exactly. We need studies that follow people over a long period of time, maybe even years, to see if there are any long-term effects on cognition.
Okay, so now I'm ready to move on and explore those annoyance maps in more detail. I love how they take this complex issue and turn it into something you can actually see.
Me too. They're really a fantastic tool. As we mentioned, they combine like the science of sound propagation with how people experience annoyance in real life.
One thing that stood out to me in the WindSense report was that they talk about moving beyond the typical decibel scale, the A-weighted one. Why is that? I mean, isn't measuring how loud something is pretty straightforward?
Well, decibels are useful, sure, but they don't tell the whole story. So you could have a wind turbine that meets the current regulations, when it's measured in A-weighted decibels, but it could still be really annoying to people because of these psychoacoustic factors,
Exactly.
like sones.
Like a mosquito.
Yeah.
Might have a low decibel level, but it's hitting that frequency where our ears are very sensitive to it.
Yeah.
And so it's very annoying.
Right. It kind of puts a question mark over how we currently measure and regulate wind turbine noise. And it's certainly something for developers and policymakers to think about.
Absolutely. So walk me through how they're made. How do we go from sound waves to these colorful maps of annoyance?
Okay, so it starts with sound propagation models. These are like really complex simulations that take into account all sorts of things, even the type of turbines they are. And then we layer on top of that all the psychoacoustic stuff we talked about earlier, like loudness as measured in zones, and also things like sharpness and fluctuation strength. Remember, all those things play a huge role in how we perceive and react to sound.
So we're taking those sound propagation models and adding in the human perspective. So it's a mix of objective scientific data and subjective human experiences.
Precisely. And by combining these two things, we get a much more realistic and useful picture of where those annoyance hotspots are likely to be.
And then we can actually see those hotspots on a map
Right.
with different colors representing different levels of annoyance.
Yeah, you got it. These show the probability of people being annoyed by the noise based on where they are in relation to the wind farm. Think of them like those heat maps they use for weather. The hotter colors show the areas where people are more likely to be bothered by noise, and the cooler colors show where it's less of a problem. And this is where those annoyance maps become really helpful. They give us more information so we can make better decisions about where to put wind farms and how to deal with noise. And for you, well, if you're thinking about living near a wind farm, a 500-meter setback for the turbine might not be enough to guarantee a quiet life.
So these maps aren't just pretty pictures. They have real consequences.
Well, one of their main findings was that the standard 500-meter setback that's often used between wind turbines and homes, it might not be enough to keep annoyance levels below 5%. In fact, their maps show that some areas within that 500-meter zone could still have pretty high levels of annoyance.
So more people than we thought could be affected by the noise.
That's the concern, yeah.
It seems like the more people feel like they're part of the process, the more likely they are to be accepting of the outcome, even if it's not, perfect.
Mhm.
And this idea of using the annoyance maps as a communication tool, that could be a really powerful way to foster that sense of collaboration.
Definitely. And it's not just about minimizing conflict either. Engaging with the community can actually lead to better outcomes for everyone. Local residents, they have valuable insights into things like the unique characteristics of the landscape or the specific concerns of different groups within the community. Tapping into that knowledge can make wind farm development, more efficient and more sensitive to local needs.
I'm realizing that there's so much more to consider when it comes to wind energy than just the technical aspects.
Yeah.
It's really a social and psychological puzzle as well.
And that's what makes it so fascinating. It's a challenge that requires us to think holistically and to consider the human element alongside the scientific and engineering aspects.
This WindSense report is really opening my eyes to the complexity of the issue. We've talked a lot about the challenges, but I'm curious, what are some of the key policy implications that arise from this research?
Well, first and foremost, it highlights the need to move beyond those simplistic noise regulations, the ones that are based solely on decibels.
Yeah.
We need to incorporate psychoacoustic measures like zones and to consider the specific qualities of wind turbine noise that actually contribute to annoyance.
So maybe instead of just setting a decibel limit, regulations could specify a maximum zone level, or even require developers to conduct annoyance modeling using these new mapping techniques.
Exactly. These policy changes, they aren't just about addressing the concerns of those who might be annoyed by wind turbine noise. They're also about ensuring the long-term viability of wind energy as a key part of our transition to a more sustainable future.
That's a great point. If wind energy is going to play a major role in tackling climate change, We need to make sure it's implemented in a way that's socially acceptable
Right.
and doesn't create, undue burdens on communities.
Yeah. Exactly. And this research helps us do that
Well,
by providing the scientific foundation for developing policies that are both effective and equitable.
it really does feel like we're starting to grasp the human side of this whole wind energy thing,
Right.
which is crucial, really.
Right.
And as we gather more data, we can refine those policies and really ensure that wind energy development is truly sustainable. Speaking of gathering data, what kind of research still needs to be done in this area? What are the gaps that future studies could fill?
Oh, there's still so much to explore. One area that needs more research is the long-term impact of wind turbine noise. Most of the studies we've talked about, they've looked at short-term effects. But what happens when people live near a wind farm for years or even decades? Are there any cumulative effects that we need to be aware of?
That's a really good point. We need those longitudinal studies, don't we, to get a clearer picture of the potential long-term consequences. I imagine there are also questions about individual variability too. Some people seem to be more sensitive to wind turbine noise than others. If you're already a light sleeper, you're probably going to be more bothered by that whooshing sound at night
Yeah,
than someone who can sleep through anything.
exactly.
What are the factors that contribute to that sensitivity?
Yeah.
And can we predict who's likely to be bothered by the noise?
And that's a really key question. Why are some people more susceptible to this noise annoyance than others? Is
Mhm.
it a physiological thing? Is it psychological? Is it a bit of both?
Hmm.
And the WindSense report dives into this idea of noise sensitivity, and they suggest that we should be using standardized scales to try and predict who is likely to be more annoyed by wind turbine noise.
So instead of this kind of one-size-fits-all approach to wind farm planning, we could have more personalized assessments and more personalized mitigation strategies.
Absolutely. And that would help make sure that decisions are more informed and they take into account these individual differences.
This is fascinating stuff.
And then, of course, there's the technological side of things too. Can we design wind farms that are inherently quieter? Can we develop more effective noise mitigation techniques? There's a lot of exciting innovation happening in that space.
It feels like there's this whole new field of study emerging at the intersection of acoustics, psychology, and engineering.
Yeah.
And the WindSense report it's really a testament to the importance of that interdisciplinary approach.
Absolutely. And I think this research, it has the potential to benefit not just the wind energy industry, but
Yeah.
but also our understanding of noise in general. What we're learning about how people perceive and respond to wind turbine noise. It can be applied to other sources of noise pollution as well, from traffic and construction to airports and industrial facilities.
It's all connected, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
about creating a soundscape that supports human health and well-being.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about urban environments or rural communities living near wind farms.
Precisely. And I think that's what makes this research so important. It's not just about solving a problem. It's about creating a better future where we can harness the power of renewable energy without compromising the quality of life for those who live nearby.
Well said. This has been a truly eye-opening. I feel like I've learned so much about not only wind turbine noise,
Mhm.
but also about the importance of considering the human element in all aspects of technological development.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but I want to bring it all back to our listener. How does all this research on psychoacoustics, memory, and annoyance maps actually apply to their life? Let's get specific and practical. So let's say someone's already living near a wind farm, right? And they're worried about the noise. What advice would you give them based on all this stuff we've learned from the WindSense report?
Well, first of all, I'd say their concerns are totally valid. Noise can have a real impact on people's lives. We can't ignore that. But instead of just worrying, I'd encourage them to take action, become more informed.
Okay, so where do they even start? What's the first step?
Well, knowledge is power, right? So I'd say check and see if there's an annoyance map for their area. They can contact the wind farm developer or their local planning authority to ask about noise levels, setbacks, all that stuff. And even if there isn't a map specifically for where they live, they can still learn a lot by talking to experts or even just neighbors who might be dealing with the same thing.
What if they're not comfortable reaching out to, like, official organizations or whatever? Are there other things they can do on their own to get a better handle on the situation?
They can start by just paying attention to their own experiences. Like, when do they notice the noise the most? What does it stop them from doing? Keeping a journal can actually be really helpful for figuring out those patterns and seeing how the noise is affecting their everyday life.
So it's like they become a citizen scientist,
Mm.
gathering data on their own noise environment. What about someone who's thinking of moving to an area that has a wind farm nearby? What should they think about, especially given what we've learned from WindSense?
Oh, doing your research is so important. I'd recommend looking for annoyance maps for the area if you can find them. Of course, visiting the area at different times of day and in different weather, that can give you a good sense of what the noise is actually like. But I think the most important thing is to really consider how sensitive you are to noise.
Because what might just be a little annoying to one person could be a huge deal for someone else.
Yeah, exactly. If someone is really sensitive to noise, living super close to a wind farm might not be the best choice, even if other people think it's fine.
Okay, now let's think about someone who's actually making decisions about wind energy development. At the community level, or maybe even bigger, what are the key takeaways from the WindSense report for them?
I think community engagement is absolutely essential. You have to involve the people who will be living near these wind farms right from the start, having open and honest conversations about noise and actually taking those concerns seriously when planning the project. That can make a world of difference.
And those annoyance maps can be super helpful for those conversations, can't they? They can help everyone visualize the noise and figure out solutions together.
Totally. The WindSense report isn't about saying wind energy is bad. It's about using science and data to help us make better decisions and create a future that works for everyone.
That's something I think we can all agree on. So before we wrap up, is there one last thought-provoking idea you'd like to leave our listener with?
I'd like to challenge our listener to think about noise in a new way. What if, instead of just seeing it as something annoying, we thought of it as information, like a signal that can help us design better places to live?
Oh, I like that. So it's like shifting from trying to just get rid of noise to actually using it to shape our world in a way that's better for us. What would that look like?
Well, imagine like parks that have soundscapes that are designed to reduce stress, or offices with sounds that help you focus, or hospitals where the sounds actually promote healing and relaxation.
So it's almost like composing a symphony of well-being, using sound as the instrument.
Exactly. And the best part is, we're not just trying to eliminate noise, we're actually trying to understand it, to work with it, to create a better relationship between sound and how we experience it.
That's such an inspiring thought. It's about taking back our relationship with sound, recognizing that it can both make our lives better and make them worse. And it all starts with being curious, with paying attention to how sound affects us and asking, how can we make our world sound better?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey into the world of wind turbine noise annoyance. If you're interested in learning more, be sure to check out the show notes for a link to the WindSense Project's Open Science Framework page. You can find the full report there, all the data, and even the actual sound samples they used in their research.
And remember, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to learn about the amazing world of sound and how it shapes our lives.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and remember knowledge is power.